Welcome to today's Comprehensive Cancer Control National Partnership webinar, Addressing Coalitions and Leadership Style. My name is Frank Bright, and I have the privilege of serving as Vice Chair of the Partnership. Today's webinar is the first of a series of 3 covering the 9 habits of successful comprehensive cancer control coalitions, so we welcome you. I also want to pass along greetings from our Chair, Dr. Cynthia Vincent of the National Cancer Institute, and her regret that she cannot be with us today. The Comprehensive Cancer Control National Partnership began informally in 1994 with 5 organizations and has now grown to 19 national organizational members currently this year. Our vision is that there be a national movement of states, tribes, territories, Pacific Island jurisdictions, and local communities working together to reduce the burden of cancer for all people. And our mission is to facilitate and support coalitions to develop and sustain implementation of comprehensive cancer control plans at the state, tribe, territorial, Pacific Island jurisdictions, and local levels. I want to thank Sarah Schaefer of the American Cancer Society and Margaret Farrell of the National Cancer Institute for their work on this webinar and for their leadership of this Comprehensive Cancer National Partnership work group. I'll turn this over to Sarah to get today's webinar started. Sarah?
Frank, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm pleased to join you as a co-chair of the Sustaining Coalitions Work Group, which I chair with Margaret Farrell. And we're very excited to be kicking off the webinar series, which we will be holding over the course of this summer. Our series is focusing on the 9 habits of successful comprehensive cancer control coalitions. I hope that you are all familiar with the guidebook that was developed back in 2014 that we've had available for all of you since that time. You can find it on our website if you have not had an opportunity to review and download it recently. We're framing the next 3 webinars around one of the attributes of the 9 habits, and we're excited to kick off that series today. A lot of work has gone into the series that we're planning for you, so I'm grateful for the work group members who all stepped up to help us put the series on for you. At the same time, over the course of the summer, we are beginning to take a look at the 9 habits and think about a refresh to the habits. So we will be coming out and talking to all of you about that as we work on that together. So as I said, we're going to have a series of 3 webinars. Today's is going to focus on empowering leadership, and I'm grateful for Margaret Farrell's work in leading today's webinar. And we will have a second webinar focused on priority work plans, which is habit 9, and that will be held in August. More information will be given about that later in today's webinar. And we're planning now for a 3rd series, webinar series on habit number 5, diversified funding. So more information to come about that. So again, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to your feedback on today's webinar. We look forward to your participation in the next 2, and I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Margaret.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to everyone. And as Sarah noted, we're really trying to frame our discussions around the 9 habits for successful cancer coalitions. And we opened a poll about 2 minutes ago just to kind of get a sense of who's on the call and your familiarity with the 9 habits. But the 9 habits were developed to be comprehensive and interconnected and really kind of lay out those attributes of successful coalitions that are not just strategies, but really are part of the coalition's culture and their way of doing business. So it's really very fitting for us to talk about leadership in our first webinar as an underpinning for those successful habits. And indeed, in the years since the 9 habits were first tested, been more than 10 years ago, there's been an increasing body of literature around those leadership traits, and leadership traits being an independent predictor of successful implementation of evidence-based public health programs. And as we look ahead to refreshing the 9 habits resource, it's really important to tease out and really amplify those traits that can really make a difference in transforming the work that we do in cancer control. In advance of today's webinar, we suggested that you complete a bit of a self-assessment as a way to prepare for today's session. And I was really excited and gratified to see that 39 of you already completed the survey. And I hope that it gave you a bit of an opportunity to tease out for yourself what are some of the traits that you bring to the comprehensive cancer control movement, and begin to kind of quantify those skills that you leverage in your professional work. And we'll be eliciting your reflection on these traits later in this call. When we began to talk about this session, it was really clear who we would invite to lead the discussion, and it's really my pleasure to welcome our speakers. Public health leaders really known for their innovation and dynamism. Kelly Siddig is the Executive Director of the Iowa Cancer Consortium, and Jennifer Redmond-Knight is Assistant Professor of Health Management and Policy at the University of Kentucky College of Public Health, and as well, she serves as co-principal investigator for the Kentucky Cancer Coalition. Kelly and Jennifer have really given a lot of thought and preparation to this session, and it'll be very clear during the webinar that they have their own thoughts about their own leadership experiences and have given a great deal of thought to those experiences and how their traits have made a difference in cancer control. And we're really looking forward to hearing their reflections, as well as welcoming Leslie Given from Strategic Health Concepts, who moderate today's discussion. A quick word on logistics, and then we'll get going. We'll be off. Just want to grab my notes. There are two ways to participate in today's call, and I can see that the vast majority of you have integrated your audio into the WebEx, and we'll be able to call on you when that time comes. So thank you for that. If you're in a noisy area, if you have trouble with your video connection or your audio connection, please feel free to pose a question or a reflection in the chat box, and we'll be alternating between people that are raising their hands through the Q&A, as well as people that will be asking their questions and sharing their reflection through the chat box. So we'll have everything going on both sides. And a bit of a pro tip when we turn over in just a minute to our speakers, in order to view Kelly and Jennifer are on video, in order to really get the fullest flavor of the presentation, we have the little, to please enable the full screen mode on your computer, which is that little, the divergent arrow up on the top of your screen, okay? So that's all I had in terms of introduction and best practices. And with one more thanks to all of you who are on the call right now, I'll happily turn it over to Leslie, Jennifer, and Kelly. So Leslie, if you want to take it away, thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Leslie Given with Strategic Health Concepts. I'm happy to be with you here today, and really happy to have Kelly and Jennifer with us today. I've known them both for a long time, and I think you'll be able to learn a lot from them. So I've got some questions for both of them, and we're just going to have a discussion here, and I know that many of you will have your own questions for them at the end. So keep thinking about those. You can go ahead and start putting them in chat. But I'm going to start with you, Kelly. How did you develop your own leadership style? How did that come about?
Okay. Thanks, Leslie. Thank you, first of all, for giving me an opportunity to have this discussion. This is something that I'm very interested in, very passionate about, and the opportunity, honestly, to even do some self-reflection, which I think you'll hear both Jennifer and I probably talk about quite a bit today, is one that I think is really important for leadership, so it's very fitting. I'm also really thrilled to be able to present with Jennifer because I think she is an outstanding role model for anybody who's looking to develop leadership. So I'm excited, honestly, to do some learning myself here today from Jennifer, as I think I do every time I talk to her. But I appreciate the question, and I think for me, the development of what I consider my own leadership traits or skills has really been more of an informal process. So I think naturally within myself, I have an interest in a couple things that naturally lead to leadership. So I'm sure at some point in the job interview, we've all had the question about where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? And I used to dread that question because I didn't have a precise answer. I haven't been something that has a one-word title. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a teacher. So for me, I really did some soul searching on that, and my answer has developed into I want to be autonomous in my work. I want to be valued in my work. I want to be working with people, and I always want to be learning and growing. So those are the keys for me. And a couple of those have led to my interest in leadership, especially. So I have that natural interest in working with people. I'm very fascinated by how they work together, but I also have an interest in that self-reflection and development, which I see as really essential for growth and especially for a leader. So the natural interest has been there. From there, I have learned a lot through a couple different ways, one of which is watching other people. So I bet we all have leaders that we remember, probably both some because they were inspiring and outstanding and you wanted to soak up their energy, and probably some that were the complete opposite. I know I personally have had both, and I have found myself taking lots of notes under leadership from both types of folks. What do I respond to being led? What do I not respond to? And so for me, a lot of my learning and leadership development has come from modeling or not modeling after people who I have been led by, as well as learning from people who I've led by. I have made a very conscientious effort, especially in times where I feel like I'm struggling a little bit, to find mentors. So that has been a really important process for me, to have conversations with people whose leadership I respect, whether that's within my own organization, outside of my own organization. It doesn't even have to be a professional setting. If I find a person who I admire, because we don't have to have a title to be a leader, if I find somebody who I admire, I'm very curious about what they do to be successful and how they inspire other people. And so I've really been thoughtful about finding those people and making sure that I'm checking in for myself and cutting out time in my schedule to meet with those folks, talk about what's going on, maybe some of my struggles, things that are going well, and learn from their feedback. And I've been very lucky because folks have been responsive to that. So I plan on paying it forward someday, hopefully. So I mentioned too, conversation, and this will be a theme probably of what I talk about today a lot, because I think that conversations are so important and honestly can be the start for almost anything. Asking questions of people, getting different points of view, learning how people do things differently, asking why a lot. Conversation really is a lot of how I learn and how I've developed what's important to me and what I want to put forth as a leader as well. And then also getting feedback, which I think is definitely a form of learning from others. So this is hard. Getting feedback is really hard, and it's something I continue to work on, but that I've made a commitment to. Learning to hear it, learning to ask for it, and then learning to see it as an opportunity, because that's really what it is. It's an opportunity for growth and development. It doesn't mean you have to take every piece of feedback as truth, but to listen to it and to see it as an opportunity has been very helpful for me in growing. And then very quickly, I definitely am someone who, you know, if I find something I'm interested in, like leadership and working with people and organizations, I seek out ways just informally to learn. So for me, that's been books. It's podcasts, which I would love to share any and all of some of the ones that I've had. A couple books that come to mind are Crucial Conversations, A book called Getting to Yes has been very helpful in my current role. There's one called The Coaching Habit, which I reference quite a bit. So just finding those books that help me build skills, and then podcasts as well have been really helpful lately. So continual learning from other people, and then I think just having that interest in development has been helpful for me.
That's great. Thank you, Kelly. I think all of us would say that modeling and seeing how others do it or the ways that we wouldn't like to do it has been very instructional. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
What about you, Jennifer? How did you develop your own leadership style?
Well, a combination of things. I think many things relate to what Kelly talked about. I think the learning from others has been critical, and I have continued to be fortunate enough to have lots of mentors that I've watched through the years and said, ooh, I like what you're doing. I'm going to try to do that, or how did they do that, or get to know a little bit more about that. And also, I am just kind of a leadership geek, if you will, and so a good leadership book will always get me excited. And so in that, the reading piece has been huge, and podcasts as well. So just to highlight a couple of my favorite books, and you'll hear it referenced several times through this conversation, is going to be 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, and then a book called Primal Intelligence, Realizing the Power of Emotional Intelligence, by Goleman, Boyatzis, and McKee, I'm sorry. And then a podcast that I listen to sometimes, I'm not listening to as many just from a time perspective, I don't commute as often, is Michael Hyatt has a great one called Lead to Win that's been really helpful. And in addition to that, I've kind of approached it as well in an academic kind of way. So I had the opportunity when I was getting my doctorate in public health to take a week-long intensive leadership course by a mentor of mine. And wow, it was intense, but it was fantastic because it really kind of helped me ask those questions. What is your leadership style? What does that look like? That's kind of when I discovered emotional intelligence, and I thought, oh, there's a word for that, which was really cool. And then as part of that class, we had to write a personal philosophy of leadership paper, which was probably one of the best, most favorite papers I've ever had to write. And I've done a lot, as you can imagine, but it was really helpful to kind of say, what is my leadership? How do I want to apply this? And what does that look like? So that's been helpful, as well as in the reflection place, just asking for feedback again, and even journaling from time to time and taking some notes and saying, how did that go? And that's kind of continued in the process of my own leadership style.
That's great, thanks. And Jennifer, we're going to stay with you. I think probably you already started to talk about this, but what kind of leadership traits have been helpful for you in leading a coalition? What we have on the line here are a bunch of people from Comprehensive Cancer Control Coalitions. So talk a little bit about that, the traits related to the coalition.
Absolutely. Well, when I started thinking about this, my list was extraordinarily long, and one of my friends and colleagues, I had her look at it, and she's like, Jennifer, seriously, people's eyes are going to glaze over. So there's a lot of things it could be, but one of the things that, again, my colleagues and I like to simplify things somewhat, and so there's kind of 2 main categories that I'm going to talk about that I try to exhibit as well as we try to look for in coalitions, and those traits are being nice and being competent. So I know that sounds overly simplistic, so I'm going to break it down a little bit, but as I think about the nice side of things, that includes things like optimism. Looking and seeing things in a positive light really makes a difference. Seeking first to understand, then be understood. It's one of the habits that Stephen Covey talks about, and wow, I keep learning about that, and you'll hear about that more, but that's something really helpful as a leadership trait, to really try to understand where people are coming from, and Kelly's already brought this up as well. A couple of things related to the emotional intelligence I talked about, and we don't have to get too geeky on the terms, but concepts like self-awareness, kind of knowing yourself and how you come across to others is huge, as well as social awareness and concepts of empathy. So really being able to try to understand what's going on with the coalition, whether that be you're leading a meeting and you look and their eyes are all glazed over and you say, we should take a break, to you look around the room and everybody looks really angry. You need to maybe pause and address that elephant in the room. So those social awareness things are huge. Somebody that I really enjoy from time to time, I've read some of her stuff and loved her YouTube videos, is someone called Brené Brown. And she has a nice YouTube video called The Difference Between Empathy and Sympathy. So I encourage you to take a look at it. It's like 2.5 minutes, so it's super short. But one of the things she says within that video, kind of a sign of an empathic response, is, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. So not always having words, but just being listening, ready in a listening place. And then the last piece of nice that I'll bring up, of course there could be more, is just kindness. I mean, kind of that goes hand in hand with nice. We all have enough stress and pressure that it's important for us to think about how we're treating others and how we're using our words. I have a 19-month-old daughter, and she has a book that she's inherited. I don't know where we got it, but it's called Words Are Not for Hurting. And as I read it, and she loves it, it's way above her level. I mean, she's not really speaking many words yet, but boy, that's so true. So how can we speak those words that can be really helpful to others? And then on the competent side, there's, again, a bajillion things we could talk about, but to kind of highlight a few is, one is going beyond your self-interest to the group's interest. And this is huge in leading a coalition, not only for yourself, but for individuals in the coalition. I know you probably have experienced, like I have, sometimes there's a few people who dominate or want to dominate or take control of the whole thing because they have all the answers. You've got to move that away from that person to the group and really even ask, am I doing this because this one person said it, or is it the group? Really important for leading the coalition. Believing the best in others, so kind of believe the best rather than assuming the worst, can be helpful. Talking about what needs to be accomplished, so the competent side, what things need to be done, who's good at doing it, and let's connect them to it. Being proactive, kind of taking initiative is hugely helpful in coalitions because people, are going to wait for somebody to take action, and so that's really helpful. Enthusiasm, people can tell when you are enthusiastic about something, and it really helps bring them in. They might not know what they're getting themselves into, but enthusiasm can go a long way with helping them join you in your cause. And then inspiration, I think sharing a compelling vision. And it's not hard to when we're dealing with cancer control, but it really is critical for a leader, and it's been helpful to say, gosh, we can do more than we think we can do if we do it together. So let's go. So those are a few things about my nice and competent list. Again, I know that's a lot more, but I think those are kind of some frameworks that have helped me, at least, in leading a coalition.
Okay, great. Thank you. And what about you, Kelly? What kind of leadership traits do you find helpful in leading a coalition?
Yeah, everything Jennifer said is my honest answer. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the simplicity so much of nice and competent, because that is so true. So I echo everything she said. And we think about cancer control, we don't think about necessarily relationships automatically, but when you're working in a coalition especially, I mean, these are good skills for life, but when you're working with a coalition who has to get along and work together in order to produce great things, that's exactly what we are all charged with doing, is relationship building. And so I love how she summarizes so well. So I'm completely on board with that. I would add a couple. Flexibility and adaptability, I think, are really important. I don't know about all of you who are listening, but at our coalition, things are always changing, and we have to be flexible, whether it's funding that's changing, whether it's partners who are changing, whether it's science that's changing. Flexibility and adaptability is really crucial. Moods change. So even to bring it back to what Jennifer just said, moods change, and we have to adapt to that. So that we can build those partnerships and ultimately be successful at cancer control. I thought a lot about this one that I really feel like I will share. It's hard to put into words, but being rational, which sounds super simple, and of course we're all rational, but I will confess I'm not always rational, but I think that is a really important skill and trait for somebody who's in a leadership role to have. To me, what that means is learning and working on your ability not to overreact in a moment, and to remember in a moment to look at the whole picture. There is a really great book that's not related to cancer or public health at all, called The Curse of the Good Girl, that I've read recently, and it's especially great for moms of preteen and teenage daughters, but it talks a lot about helping people work through conflict. And the author, Rachel Simmons, talks about one step when you're having a tough conversation or working through conflict is to take time to pause and remember your own role in it. And even if we think we are not part of the conflict, we are. And recognizing that role does two things. One, it puts it back into perspective and helps us keep a rational perspective. But two, it also shows the other person that you have a stake in this and are willing to take some of the weight onto your shoulders. So I think rationality and just an ability to have that in the moment, which is the hardest time to have it, is really an important leadership trait. Because I agreed so much with everything Jennifer said, I think I will finish up my answer by kind of moving into some skills, if that's okay. So maybe less traits you're born with, but more skills that are definitely buildable that I've found really helpful. And the first, I think, is communication skills. I think that is absolutely crucial for a leader. And that is something you can be born with. You can be a great communicator, but it is also something you can learn. And when I say good communication skills, what I mean is everything from being able to write a grammatically correct sentence to knowing, like Jennifer said, in the moment what to say in a tough conversation and how to work through that, how to express empathy through words, how to communicate appropriately in the moment. So that's a big thing, but it is something that can be learned, and I think it's absolutely important. I think, honestly, it's a foundational thing. Part of communication is listening, and I think that's another trait that's really important. This is one that I work on all the time, and probably the people around me would say that I have a long ways to go on it. I tend to be a talker, but I think it's so important that I am really trying to practice this all the time. I've read and heard and listened to a lot of things recently about the power of silence. And I really think that it's so important, and truly being a leader doesn't mean that you have to be the one talking the most. And in fact, I think leadership happens more when you're quiet and you let the folks around you do the talking. So I've been trying to do things like, if I have something to say, take that pause again and try saying nothing instead, to make space for other people's thoughts and ideas, and their words. I think that's absolutely important. Again, allow yourself that moment before speaking. And especially in a coalition setting where we may have a million work groups, I know an example here, we are so excited to charge ahead with some new work group efforts that we're starting to map out plans. We've got our work plan, we want to do this, this, and this. And it's very easy to do that, but what we're finding we have to try a little bit harder at doing is having the conversation, again, comes back to conversation, and listening to people's needs and listening to them in a bunch of different ways. So in a work group setting, in one-on-one, maybe even listening to the nonverbal cues as well. So a whole bunch of listening is really helping us determine what collaborative work needs to actually be done. And then I would say an ability to handle conflict is really important in a leader as well. Again, totally something that can be learned. Some of the books I referenced at first absolutely deal with that. And it's something, again, I know I personally have a lot of growth to do in it, but it's so crucial. To be able to learn to steer a really tough conversation through conflict with both words and listening, I think can make or break a situation, because as soon as conversation shuts down, which it absolutely can do in a situation of conflict, there's nothing that's going to happen after that. So in order to not have the conversation shut down and the work shut down, being able to steer things through conflict is super important. And then lastly, I'll share something that a past colleague and a really good friend of mine, who some of you may know, Sarah Comstock, she's with the American Cancer Society, told me once. She gave me these 3 words, and I actually have it on my desk still. It says curious, confident, and comfortable with discomfort. And I'm sure it came from a book somewhere that I can't reference, so forgive me for that. But I keep that on my desk as a reminder that that's what we should be. Instead of being reactive and confrontational, we should be curious. Ask why, ask what, instead of being reactive. Being confident, know that you can do this so that you can express yourself in a situation, and then comfortable with discomfort. And that's part of, again, learning to work through conflict as well.
Thank you, Kelly. That was really helpful. And I think, you know, we hear common themes with you and what Jennifer said about seeking first to understand and listening and communicating. It's really important. You talked about flexibility, adaptability, being rational. Jennifer talked about everything that goes under being nice, and then competencies. And so we want to switch now and talk about how you've used these leadership traits to empower your coalition, and specifically your Comprehensive Cancer Control Coalition. And I think we'll go back to you, Jennifer, and have you talk about this first, and then we'll come back to you, Kelly.
I can't get off mute.
You're on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. There's still a red button. So in many ways, there's, again, a lot of traits that I've used at different times, and several of the things that Kelly talked about, the communication is so critical. But I'm going to talk about a little bit how enthusiasm and optimism have really been really empowering for our coalition. So as you probably noticed at the beginning, I'm connected to Kentucky and have been in Kentucky and working with Kentucky for many, many years, more than 15 years now. And if you don't know much about Kentucky, one of the unfortunate things is we are #1 in cancer, and lung cancer really kind of brings us to that #1 spot, unfortunately. And so as a coalition, it can be really discouraging to be like, oh, why are we still #1? Can we do anything? Is there any way forward? Can we look, you know, at things a different way? And so the enthusiasm and optimism that I've been able to bring has been really helpful to the group to say, you know what, it's hard, but, you know, if we can do this together, we can make an impact. And as a matter of fact, because it's so big that we really have to work together to address this enormous problem. And so that's been really helpful at kind of framing us, okay, here's where we're headed. We can do this if we work together. One of the examples that we've been able to be successful in relates to colon cancer. We've seen significant increases in screening, significant reductions in incidence and mortality as a result of working together over many years, again, over 15 years. And I know many of you have probably seen that success yourselves. There's been a lot of different things happening, particularly around the colon cancer space. And so we've seen such just tremendous progress, and that has created a lot of celebration. We've been able to say, wow, we can do this. It seemed impossible back in 2002 or 2006, but wow, we've really made some progress. And so I want to get on board with this, and what can we do next? And so that momentum has really allowed us to focus on lung cancer now in Kentucky. And we've been #1 in lung cancer for a long, long time. #2 in colon, you know, colon is our second colon issue, but we couldn't get to lung initially. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. That's a whole nother webinar. But the momentum we were able to generate from colon cancer has been able to say, oh my goodness, I want to get on board. And you know, the Kentucky Cancer Consortium, they're doing something, they're taking action, and so I want to be there. And that's really been helpful. The other piece that I've used related to the enthusiasm and optimism is that everybody has a role, and it's an important role. And so really kind of saying your role, your organization has a fit. Let's understand the roles and responsibilities needed, find that fit, and get people moving in that direction. And people will know that I am not afraid to call on them to say, hey, do you think you could do this? Because I know that they do it well. And people don't always admit it, but I'm usually one to say, hey, I enthusiastically think you can do this, and I'm hopeful and positive that we can make this happen. So that's been really helpful. And then the kind of last piece of that is we've been able to focus on specific goals and objectives, and with the focus on we can do something specifically to reduce this type of cancer, it's helped us kind of not get in our own way. I know that for most of us, we've experienced coalition dynamics that sometimes there's a little competition among different members of our coalition. There are different logo fighting that happens. There's all kinds of stuff that happens. But what I've discovered is when we focus on the goal, wow, people are able to say, okay, I can do this. And they start to kind of forget about those other things, and we really can make an impact together.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so, Kelly, we'll come back to you. So the question again is, how have you used the leadership traits that you talked about to empower your comprehensive cancer control coalitions? Anything to add to what Jennifer has said?
Yeah, I have a couple things. Again, though, I love the idea of enthusiasm and optimism. Cancer is serious business, but we can actually it's okay to have fun working on it. And I think the more that people enjoy doing the work and working with the others around them, the more likely they are to come back. So I think that is spot on, wonderful advice. A couple things that I'll add is one, so it can be really fun and positive, but again, I'm going to kind of bring it back to the ability to navigate conflict. And part of that is making an environment where it's okay to have conflict, where it's safe to have those conversations, and to model that safety and action. And for us, we found a really successful way to do that is to be very explicit about it within settings. So to say up front, we're going to have some conflict today, and that's okay because we're all working on the same thing, and this is how we're going to grow and learn. So an example that we've used is within our staff, we developed a set of, we call them rules of engagement. And they include things like always asking why, remembering that discomfort is a growth opportunity, listening to and encouraging all voices, knowing that it's okay not to know, thinking in solutions. It goes on and on, setting assumptions on the table. These are ways that we can hold each other accountable, but also remember that it's okay to have tough conversations in our work because we're all working together and we're going to resolve them. We've found that using those rules of engagement have been really helpful outside of our staff too. So sometimes we need to say explicitly, recognize, as Jennifer called it earlier, the elephant in the room. There's going to be some conflict here, and that's okay. And does everybody agree that that's okay? And getting that agreement makes it a safe place to talk about the really hard things, which we do have to do in order to move forward with our work. So making and modeling a safe place to have tough conversations, I think, is really important. And the other thing that I would like to mention is very in line with, I think, today's topic, and partly why I appreciate this webinar so much, is a belief in and a willingness to take an investment in, I hate this term, but I'm going to use it anyway because I think people are familiar with it, soft skills. Like what Jennifer was talking about before, emotional intelligence. For us at the Coalition, we've done a lot of work around facilitation training, again, conflict resolution, decision-making, elevator speech training, which are not always found in, public health settings. We're going to think a lot about data, but we do have to think about these skills that we're talking about today too in order to be truly successful. So we've found it very helpful to do that. A great example is we've recently worked with Jennifer, who has done training for our coalition on exactly what I mentioned before. So emotional intelligence, setting direction when it's not clear what the direction is within work groups. So we have definitely taken time and put some resources into making sure that not just our staff, but our coalition members who are helping to move things forward have training and knowledge in these areas that are really important just to keep the conversations and work going.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And, it's interesting to me, a lot of what you and Jennifer are saying is related to the habit empowering leadership as one of the 9 habits, but also related to the other habits you talked about accountability and having clear roles and responsibilities, that really drives, that a good leader kind of drives those things, and being goal-oriented and creating that safe environment for those conversations. We know we're going to disagree. It's okay that we disagree. So thank you for that. I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to try to get to the questions pretty quickly here, Jennifer and Kelly. So, but I do want to end, and if you could just tell us, what's the #1 leadership lesson that you've learned along the way? I know it's hard to choose, but if you could choose one.
Go, Kelly.
Oh, no,
we can't hear you. Kelly, we can't hear you.
There we go. Sorry, my unmute button wasn't responding. You can hear me now?
Yes, that happened to me the last time, so yes, go.
Rolling with it. Okay, #1, I would say, I'm going to give you 2, but 1 is super short. #1 would be, again, revisiting, make sure everybody is at the same starting point in terms of expectations and culture even. We've spent a lot of time doing what we've called branding, but really what it is determining our organizational values and how we want to be perceived as an organization. That's been tremendously helpful because people know what to expect. We're all presenting ourselves in similar ways, and there's just so much value to starting at the same point, and I think it can really be a role of a leader in order to make that happen, because otherwise time may not be spent on it. So I think that's really important. And then I'm just going to bring it back to conversation. Talk some more, ask the questions, don't hold in your assumptions, talk, and then continue with learning and self-reflection, always looking for that growth. It may have even been you, Jennifer, but somebody said recently, the moment that you think you don't need to do self-reflection, that's the time you need to do self-reflection, because we all do, and we all have opportunities to grow. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Kelly. So Jennifer, how about you? #1 leadership lesson.
#1, I'm going to say, I'm going to borrow from Covey, seek first to understand, then be understood. And it's kind of a constant challenge for me sometimes. And early on in my coalition time, I got that wrong initially. I got frustrated when people wouldn't go with my side, or if everybody agreed and 2 people didn't, I got frustrated with them. But then I realized that was kind of my problem too. So seek first to understand, then be understood is huge at leading coalitions.
Thank you. Thank you both. So we want to move now to be able to take questions, and I had just posted something in chat saying, please put your questions here. If anyone does have a question, you can open up that chat box and just enter it in there, and we will take those as they come. So we'll give you a little bit of time to put that in. Also, we are able to unmute people as they raise their hands. And I'm going to ask you, Margaret, if you can kind of keep an eye on that for hands being raised. And I will look at the chat. But if anybody have a question, go ahead and raise your hand.
And maybe while we're waiting for people to raise their hands, if you can't see the chat box yet, the question that Leslie wants to pose is, how have you used your leadership traits to empower your coalition? And again, we'll take questions either through the chat box or raising your hands is great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. Yes, that question is put the way that Kelly and Jennifer have answered. We'd like to hear from you too, but if you do have a question for either one of them, we're happy to take that as well. So anyone want to share how you've been able to empower your coalition? All right, I am not seeing any questions in chat right now, and I don't think that we have any hands raised. So if you're having trouble with that, I see something on Q&A. Let me read it here. It's from Kelly, another Kelly. She asked, do you include local government agencies in your coalition? So let me go back to you, Jennifer, first and see how you would answer that question.
Yes, great question. So actually, no, not often. So we have an interesting structure in Kentucky where as a Kentucky Cancer Consortium, we kind of focus on state and multi-regional organizations, and we have a sister organization called the Kentucky Cancer Program that focuses on regional and local, and they have what's called district cancer councils. And so we try to connect, and so in the everyday sense, the local regional folks are engaged in what we call district cancer councils with the Kentucky Cancer Program. And then kind of state and multi-regional folks are part of the consortium. What I will say, though, is as we have statewide summits or statewide webinars, we do engage local folks and encourage that participation as well.
We do work with a lot of local public health at the county level. So we are funded by the State Department of Public Health. We are a nonprofit organization that's staffed by university employees, but funded by the Department of Public Health. So we call it a kind of a triad. It's a unique organization, but within that, we do work with a lot of state and local public health folks.
Okay. And so we have a couple of other questions that are also related to what the consortium or the coalition looks like. From Tiffany, she asked, what does your consortium network look like? Do you have a central state coalition that branches out to local groups? And I know that we do have several coalitions who have regional affiliates or coalitions. So Kelly, do you want to talk about that first?
Yep. We have one main coalition. So again, our primary organization is a nonprofit. We have a membership structure. Anyone can join. We do have a fee structure, but we pretty much waive that if anyone asks. So that funding is not a barrier. So we have a membership of about 400 folks across the state, and then we have numerous partners who aren't necessarily formal members, but are definitely involved. Within our main membership, we have work groups and a few committees, but those are all made up of members. They're not regional, so it's all statewide, one core group of folks.
Okay, great. And Jennifer, what does the consortium look like?
Yeah, so for us, and I kind of started that conversation a little bit, is that we've got kind of statewide partner organizations, member organizations, and those are going to be anywhere from, we've got the American Cancer Society and our state health department to medical associations and health systems and nonprofit organizations. So there's a lot of different folks in that, and then we partner really closely. One of those organizations, as I said, is the Kentucky Cancer Program that really work at the local regional level. So we try to create synergies, and one of the things we try to do too is we learn both directions. And so if there's a statewide issue going on, then we kind of tackle it as a consortium, and if there's regional questions going on or policy needs, we kind of hear those bubble up, or vice versa. We say, hey, what can we get out to the region? So we communicate a lot among both.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. And we actually have another question. This is from Achal, who says, how do you balance the coalition conversations when there's a difference in power within the members? Jennifer, do you want to take that one first?
Absolutely. So, it depends on the setting. One of the things that I've done for a long time, which made people uncomfortable, and it's a little easier to do once you have a doctorate, is we usually call people by their first names. Even if they have a bajillion degrees, we try to create, it's a first name conversation. in terms of our communication. And then we also try to break things up into smaller groups at times to have conversations. So if there's a power kind of struggle, we may not want to have an entire conversation in a large group, but we break it up into a small group. The other thing we try to do is sometimes the conversation doesn't have to be like if you're voting on something, for instance, or if you need to have a conversation, it can be done electronically. So we'll sometimes do like anonymous voting on different things and kind of send it to our members. And so we kind of hear from folks without some people who may have a whole lot to say dominating what influence they have on everybody else. So we kind of look at things a little differently. The other thing we try to do is we actually ask specifically for those who are a little more quiet, perhaps, or may have the minority opinion. We try to actually ask for their input directly and say, we value you, and we encourage other folks. We thank them for sharing, but want to make sure we hear from everyone.
Thanks, Jennifer. Kelly, anything to add to that?
I think everything Jennifer said was great. Again, this is where kind of some of that continued learning and education and facilitation and difficult conversations comes in. I love Jennifer's methods for calling out quiet voices. Something we've been doing lately a lot too is having offline conversations with just one or two folks. So if we're not hearing someone's voice during a meeting and kind of not able to pull that out, just following up with them afterwards and saying, is there anything you'd like to bring up that maybe didn't get said, or what did you think? And just a quick personal check-in where it might feel a little bit safer to have some conversation has been helpful.
Great, thank you. I want to also, a couple other questions have come in, but I do want to say that someone mentioned, Stephanie, that one way of ensuring that leaders empower the coalition members is actually a form of engagement in that you let them choose priorities from the cancer plan for implementation. So I'm sure that you both would agree with that that's something that you practice.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Here's a tough one too. We also have had a lot of, and I think this comes back to listening a little too. We've had a lot of discussion about knowing when it's okay to have something be done. So I think it's great to have people's buy-in for priorities, but you also have to kind of counterbalance that with if you're saying you have to choose a priority. What if there's not people around there who really have the capacity to do the work? So balance that with a decision in advance that everybody's involved in that includes how do we know when the time has come and we don't have collaborative work around this. So letting people know it's okay. So for example, we have a ton of work groups, and we went into that structure knowing that not every single one would come away with a work plan, and we would have to really make a tough decision at some point that this work group right now doesn't have an action plan because it's just not that work group's time. And so I think even asking people to choose a priority, you have to also counterbalance that with giving them permission to say, I can't work on this right now. And our role as coalitions is to find the places where that collaborative work needs to be done and where there are people ready to do it too. So I think it's a balance.
Thanks, Kelly. And Jennifer, there's a question here I think that would be really good if you could help answer. It's about, are there emotional intelligence or communication skill building activities that you can share that you would use with the coalition?
Oh, that's great. Well, one thing is I did kind of a whole training on that, but one of the things that I think, there's many different action steps. One is to check in with folks. I guess several. Okay, so one is reflect. And so after your next meeting, kind of take some notes about how you think it went, kind of the perspectives of others, and then ask a few people who are those who would be trusted but constructive in their communication to you. So you could say, how did that go? How did I approach things? Were people resonating? Were they not? And people who can be honest yet supportive with you can be one piece of that. And, you know, there's kind of several. The other thing I would just encourage you is just to keep watching for nonverbal and verbal cues, if you will. And so there's kind of a lot of different steps, but those are a few kind of pieces that can help you. Is just watch, ask for feedback from people who you can trust, and see kind of how things go. Do kind of a check-in reflection that can help grow in that emotional intelligence.
Thank you so much. And I think we're getting close to being out of time. So there were a couple other questions that came through, and I think we can actually post those on a post-webinar communication that will go out to everyone. But Margaret, if you can bring us back to the slides, the last slide. We've got the next webinar that we want to talk about. Great, thank you. So we do have another webinar coming up. As Sarah said, we've got 3 in a series here about the 9 habits. The next one is coming up on August 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll be talking about making the most of your priority work plan. So that's one of the most important habits that's part of the 9 habits. And we have Nikki Campbell from Montana who will be talking about that. So there is a link there on the slide that you can see, the bit.ly. You can also find that on the Comprehensive Cancer Control National Partner website. You can link to that and go ahead and register now. Registration is open for that. We don't have yet a date for the 3rd one. It will be on diversified resources or funding, but as soon as we have a date for that in September, we'll post it. Couple of other things that we want to end with. One is that we are working, the Comprehensive Cancer Control National Partnership is working on updating the 9 Habits Guide, and we're looking for new coalition examples to include in the guide. So if you have a success story that you want to share about the 9 habits, whether it's empowering leadership or some of the others we're going to talk about, if you could please get in touch with myself or my business partner, Karen Homan. We would love to hear about those, and we'll be happy to collect those experiences and see how we can build them into the new 9 Habit Guide. And with that, I think, Margaret, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, and thank you, Leslie. And just a quick word of thanks to our speakers who really did such a wonderful job, and both in their, as you can tell from their reflections as well as their presentations. So Kelly, Jennifer, and Leslie, thank you so much. You really are class acts who lead with kindness and collaboration and really gave all of us a great deal to think about today. As you end we're about to end the webinar, and you will see an evaluation form pop up as you exit. If you would please take a moment or two to fill out the evaluation form. It will really help us shape the upcoming webinars as well as plan our work ahead with the Sustaining Coalitions Work Group as part of the Comprehensive Cancer Control National Partnership. So thank you all very much for your attention and your participation today.